The international summit hall was packed, its marble walls echoing with murmurs as delegates from around the world waited. Flags of many nations lined the stage, but the tension in the air was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and leaders leaned forward in their seats, sensing history was about to unfold. Benjamin Netanyahu, the long-serving Prime Minister of Israel, stood at the podium. His posture was sharp, his tone unwavering, his words aimed not only at the delegates but at Africa itself. "Africa will fall in line," he declared, his voice carrying a cold authority. "Nations cannot resist forever. Order will be restored. And we will decide the terms." The room fell into uneasy silence. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. His statement wasn't merely a political stance, it was a warning. Then, from across the hall, Ibrahim Traoré rose to his feet. The young leader of Burkina Faso carried no crown, no ancient empire behind him, only the fire of conviction and the weight of a continent tired of subjugation. As he approached the microphone, the delegates leaned closer, sensing the moment would shift. Traoré paused, letting the silence grow until it felt unbearable. Then, with a voice calm but unshakable, he answered. "We break every chain." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The words weren't just a reply, they were a declaration of defiance, a promise that Africa would not bend, not surrender, and not fall in line with any empire's demands. The clash had begun, and the world was watching. The silence that followed Traoré's words was electric. Delegates exchanged glances, whispers rushed through the hall like sparks igniting dry grass. Reporters scrambled to jot down every word, their cameras flashing furiously. Netanyahu's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. He was not accustomed to being challenged so openly, especially by a young African leader standing tall without hesitation. He leaned slightly forward at the podium, his voice low but edged with steel. "Strong words, but words do not change the reality of power. Nations who defy us will pay a price. History has shown that those who resist are crushed beneath the weight of inevitability." Some delegates murmured approval, others recoiled at the starkness of the threat. Yet all eyes were on Traoré. Traoré did not flinch. His uniformed presence radiated calm strength, his eyes scanning the hall with defiance. "History has also shown," he began, "that empires rise and empires fall. Chains may be forged, but they are always broken. Africa's chains are breaking now, one by one, and no empire, no matter how powerful, can stop what has already begun." His voice rose as he continued. "Africa will not fall in line. Africa will not kneel. Not to Israel, not to any empire. We will rise, and we will rise together." The applause began slowly, from one side of the hall, but it spread like thunder until the entire chamber erupted. Some stood, clapping, while others sat frozen in disbelief. The battle of words had escalated, and the summit was no longer about cooperation, it was about survival, dignity, and the destiny of continents. Netanyahu gripped the sides of the podium tighter, his knuckles widening under the strain. The applause for Traoré still echoed in the chamber, cutting through his authority like a blade. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace, raising his hand to quiet the hall. "You speak of rising," Netanyahu said, his voice cold and sharp. "But Africa has always depended on the goodwill of others. Weapons, trade, aid, it all flows from us. Without it, your nations collapse. Do not mistake passion for strength." The word struck like a hammer, designed to humiliate, to remind Africa of its scars. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably, while others watched Traoré with anticipation, waiting to see if he would bend under the weight of such an accusation. But Traoré's expression did not falter. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice calm yet cutting. "We depended because we were forced to. We suffered because chains were placed on us. But we are no longer asking. We are building. We are growing. We are uniting." He raised his hand, his tone hardening into fire. We break every chain. We build our own weapons. We plant our own fields. We control our own destiny. And the day Africa collapses is the day the sun forgets to rise. The chamber roared once more, a wave of applause and cheers that drowned Netanyahu's scowl. Leaders from across the global south nodded, their faces lit with pride. The tide of the summit had shifted, the stage was no longer Israel's. The confrontation was no longer words on a stage. It was a battle of visions, submission or sovereignty. The summit hall had turned into an arena. Every word exchanged between Netanyahu and Traoré carried the weight of nations, echoing far beyond the marble walls into capitals across the globe. The cameras caught every twitch, every glance, every pause. This was more than diplomacy, it was combat without weapons. Netanyahu's tone grew harsher. Africa's unity is an illusion, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Your countries are divided by borders, tribes, and struggles. You cannot resist us together because you will never stand together. That is why Africa will fall in line, it always has, and it always will. A cold wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. The words were brutal, crafted to wound, to drive wedges between African leaders listening from their seats. Some bowed their heads, the painful truth of history weighing on them. But Traoré's eyes blazed. He stepped closer to the microphone, his voice steady and commanding, cutting through the tension like thunder. Unity was once a dream. Today, it is a reality. Israel and the West have underestimated Africa because you always saw us as separate pieces. But when those pieces lock together, they form an unbreakable chain. And that chain is no longer held by you, it is held by us. He lifted his hand toward the rows of African delegates, many of whom rose to their feet, clapping in unison, their faces alight with determination. You say we will fall in line, Traoré thundered. I tell you, we are drawing the line. And Africa will stand behind it, shoulder to shoulder. The chamber erupted, applause from African and allied nations, gasps from the West, silence from Israel's corner. The confrontation was no longer just words, it had become a symbolic war between domination and liberation. The hall trembled with the sound of clapping and stomping feet. Delegates from Africa and allies stood together, their applause crashing like waves against Netanyahu's stern silence. Cameras zoomed in on Traoré, his figure commanding the stage, his words now the heartbeat of the summit. Netanyahu's face hardened, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing like a hawk locked on prey. He leaned once more into the microphone, his voice sharp as a blade. Words inspire, but power decides. Africa's speeches do not change the fact that we control the weapons, the money, the systems that govern this world. Without us, your dreams crumble into dust. His declaration sliced the air, calculated to remind the world of Israel's alliances and influence. Some Western leaders nodded in agreement, their expressions grim. But Traoré's reply came swift, his voice steady, his presence unshaken. Dust is what empires become. Dust is what arrogance leaves behind. Africa has lived through your weapons, your money, your systems. Yet here we are, still standing, still rising, stronger than ever. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the hall, then delivered the line that struck like lightning. You cannot own tomorrow, because you cannot even hold back today. The chains you forged are breaking, and they are breaking in your hands. The crowd erupted. Delegates stood, pounding their desks, shouting in support. The energy shifted entirely, Netanyahu's iron grip on the room was slipping. Around the globe, viewers watching live began flooding social media with clips of Traoré's words. Hashtags erupted, videos spread like wildfire, and suddenly the confrontation wasn't just a summit, it was a movement. The summit hall was now a storm of divided loyalties, cheers rising from African nations and their allies, uneasy murmurs from the Western Bloc. Every camera stayed locked on the two men, capturing what was quickly becoming one of the most unforgettable confrontations in recent history. Netanyahu straightened his tie, his voice rising with defiance. You may think applause makes you strong, but applause fades. Armies remain. Wealth remains. Alliances remain. Africa cannot fight the inevitable. And if you push too far, you will regret it. It was a threat, blunt and unmasked, a reminder of the military might and global influence Israel wielded. The words landed like stone, filling the hall with a tense silence. But Traoré's face held no fear. He stepped forward, his voice steady yet thunderous. We do not fear regret, because we have already lived through centuries of it. Our scars have taught us that the only true regret is silence. And Africa will be silent no more. He let the weight of his words hang in the air before continuing. You threaten us with armies, but our strength is not measured in weapons. It is measured in unity, in resilience, in a continent that refuses to kneel. You can break walls, but you cannot break the will of a people who have decided to rise. The chamber erupted into a standing ovation, louder than before. Delegates from Africa, Asia, and even parts of Latin America rose to their feet, pounding their desks in agreement. The thunder of applause drowned out the last remnants of Netanyahu's threat. The moment was clear, the summit was no longer Israel's stage, it belonged to Traoré and the voice of a continent reclaiming its place in the world. The hall was now boiling with tension, a clash of worlds unfolding in front of the cameras. Every word Netanyahu spoke seemed to lean on history's weight, and every word Traoré gave back shattered that weight into dust. Netanyahu raised his hand again, his voice low but heavy with menace. You mistake defiance for victory. Empires fall, yes, but not before crushing countless nations beneath them. Do not let Africa be the next victim of its own pride. The world bends to power, and power is not in your hands. The silence that followed was suffocating, his words echoing like a storm cloud looming over the room. Western delegates nodded grimly, some even smirked, as if convinced Netanyahu had delivered the final blow. But Traoré stepped forward, his eyes burning with unshaken fire. He spoke not just to Netanyahu but to the world. Power is not in weapons, nor in money. Power is in the spirit of a people who refuse to bow. Africa has been crushed before, but every time we rose. And this time, we rise together. You cannot crush what refuses to stay down. He paused, letting the words sink in, then raised his voice. You call this pride. I call it survival. You call it arrogance. I call it freedom. And if war is your answer, then know this. Africa's fire will not be extinguished. It will spread, and it will burn every chain you try to place on us. The chamber exploded into thunderous applause, louder than any moment before. Leaders from across the global south stood shoulder to shoulder, their clapping a unified roar of resistance. Netanyahu's face darkened, his jaw tight, but the tide had shifted beyond his control. The battle of words was no longer just political, it had become legendary. The room felt like the center of the world, an arena where history itself was being rewritten in real time. Netanyahu's words had struck with the sharpness of steel, but Traoré's replies had cut deeper, igniting something larger than the confrontation itself. Netanyahu leaned forward again, his voice quieter now, almost icy in its precision. Your fire may burn brightly, but flames consume themselves. Africa will destroy itself from within, corruption, division, poverty. You don't need enemies. You carry your own destruction in your hands. The words were surgical, crafted to slice at Africa's wounds, to remind the world of the scars that had long plagued the continent. For a moment, the hall quieted, as if some in the audience feared there was truth in his venom. But Traoré's gaze never wavered. He stepped into the silence, his voice slow, deliberate, carrying the calm of a man who had already walked through fire. Yes, we have scars. But scars are proof we survived. They do not weaken us, they remind us of what we've endured and what we refuse to endure again. Africa's wounds are healing, and every insult you throw is another reason for us to unite faster. He raised his hand, his voice rising into thunder. You say we carry destruction. I say we carry rebirth. You say our fire will burn itself out. I say our fire will forge a new dawn. Africa will not collapse, it will rise from its scars, stronger than any empire that ever sought to chain it. The audience roared, the sound shaking the very air. Delegates stood, some with tears in their eyes, others with clenched fists lifted high. The momentum was unstoppable now. Netanyahu leaned back, his face stiff with frustration, while Traoré's words rippled across the globe, carried through every screen, every feed, every heart that had waited for Africa to speak with one voice. The atmosphere inside the summit had transformed into something beyond politics, it was now a battlefield of conviction. Every word carried the weight of centuries, every exchange etched itself into the memory of the watching world. Netanyahu, his face pale but unyielding, leaned back into the microphone. His voice was sharp, almost trembling with restrained anger. You can rally applause and stir emotion, but when the lights fade, reality returns. Africa cannot shield itself from consequences. Defy us, and you will pay a price heavier than you can imagine. It was a final attempt to reassert dominance. A threat meant to remind everyone of the machinery of sanctions, pressure, and silent wars that great powers had long used to bend nations to their will. But Traoré, standing firm under the blazing lights, did not flinch. He let the silence stretch, his gaze steady, until the tension felt unbearable. Then, his words fell like thunder. We have already paid every price. We have carried chains, buried our children, and endured centuries of theft and humiliation. What heavier price is there left to pay? You threaten us with consequences, but what you call consequences, we call freedom's cost. His voice rose, now echoing through the chamber, unstoppable. You cannot scare those who have lived their worst nightmares and still stand tall. You cannot chain those who have already broken free. Africa is not asking for permission, it is declaring its destiny. The room shook with applause, louder than any before. Delegates stood shoulder to shoulder, united in a way that transcended borders. For the first time, Netanyahu looked unsettled, his silence betraying the weight of defeat. Around the world, the images spread. Traoré's defiance against Netanyahu's threats became the defining moment of the summit, a symbol of resistance, of Africa rising unbroken against all odds. The hall trembled with the energy of history unfolding. Cameras flashed, every lens capturing the image of two worlds colliding, Netanyahu, with his threats heavy as iron, and Traoré, with his defiance blazing like fire. Netanyahu, his voice edged with desperation, leaned forward one last time. You call this destiny, but destiny is written by those with power. Africa will learn this truth, either by choice or by force. The words were meant to land as final, but they fell into silence. The world was no longer waiting for his conclusion. All eyes turned to Traoré. He stepped into the center, his uniform catching the light, his presence commanding absolute attention. His voice thundered. Destiny is not written by the powerful, it is written by the brave. Africa will not learn from your threats, it will teach the world through its courage. You speak of force, but know this, Africa does not bow to force. We break chains. We burn barriers. And we rise, again and again, until no one can deny our place among the free. The chamber erupted, deafening applause, chants, and cheers that rolled like thunder across the hall. Delegates rose in unison, their voices joining as one. Even outside, where crowds had gathered to watch on massive screens, a roar of solidarity echoed. Netanyahu, stone-faced, could only sit back, his silence louder than any speech. Traoré, however, stood tall, his hand raised, not in anger but in unity, sealing the moment as one that would forever mark Africa's defiance. Across the world, headlines blazed, Africa breaks every chain. And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré became not just a leader, but a symbol of unyielding resistance. A voice that spoke not only for Burkina Faso, but for an entire continent refusing to bow. Today, Africa has spoken with one voice. We have endured centuries of chains, exploitation, and humiliation, but still we rise. To those who warn us of force, of consequences, of inevitable submission, I say this: we have already paid the heaviest price, and yet we remain unbroken. Our scars are not signs of weakness, they are proof of survival. They remind us that no empire lasts forever, but the spirit of a people who refuse to bow cannot be extinguished. We will not fall in line. We will not bend under threats. We will not trade our dignity for fear. Africa will break every chain placed upon it, and in doing so, we will light the path for generations to come. The future is not theirs to write, it belongs to us. And as long as Africa breathes, Africa will stand free.